Here's a number that should scare you more than any of this. $187,000. That is not the price of the car. That's the number one rental company quietly logged as the total recovery cost, legal fees, repossession, depreciation, lost income, and a federal warrant for a single Mercedes G-Wagon that a renter simply never brought back. Not stolen in a heist, not vanished in the night, just kept, quietly, politely, month after month, hoping nobody would notice. Someone noticed. Welcome to Catastrophe Theory, where we figure out exactly how fast your life falls apart if you actually let the intrusive thoughts win. I'm CJ Theory, and today we're looking at what happens when you rent a luxury car and just decide not to give it back. You're in the driver's seat of a car that isn't yours. It never was, not really, but for the last 4 days it's felt like yours. The seat has learned the shape of your spine, adjusted itself, memorized it, the way expensive cars do. The cabin smells like new leather and the pine air freshener you clipped to the vent on day one, back when this whole thing still felt like a treat you'd earned rather than a decision quietly turning into a problem. Outside, rain slides sideways across a windshield that costs more to replace than your rent, wipers ticking in a rhythm that started to feel almost hypnotic. There's a particular kind of silence inside a car like this, a hush so complete you can hear your own breathing, hear the small mechanical hum of the climate system adjusting itself half a degree, hear the almost imperceptible click of the indicator stalk under your fingers. It's the kind of silence that expensive engineering is specifically designed to produce, and it's easy, in that silence, to forget that every mile you're driving is being logged somewhere, on a server, by a company that has done this exact math 10,000 times before you. You pull into the return lane at the airport rental facility. There's an agent in a reflective vest with a tablet, tapping through a queue of returning cars ahead of you. Your hands are on the wheel. The engine is still running, and somewhere between the third car ahead of you and the tablet agent glancing up, a thought slides in. Quiet, almost reasonable. What if I just didn't turn in? You keep driving. Nobody stops you. There's no alarm, no gate that slams down, no siren. That's the first thing that surprises people who actually do this. The moment of getting away with it feels like nothing at all. No dramatic music, just emerge onto the highway and a car that, as far as the physical world is concerned, now belongs to you. I want to be honest about why we're doing this episode. I've spent years digging through repossession case files, insurance fraud investigations, and the genuinely surprising number of interviews with people who did exactly what I just described. Some out of desperation, some out of a strange kind of dare with themselves, and a few, disturbingly, almost by accident, because a rental extension got lost in an email thread and 30 days quietly became 90. I'm not a repo agent. I'm not a lawyer. I'm someone who got obsessed with a simple question. How long does the illusion last, and what exactly breaks first? Because here's the thing about never returning a rented car. It isn't really one event. It's a slow-motion collapse with distinct, almost clinical stages, each with its own machinery quietly grinding into motion behind the scenes, invisible to you until it isn't. And I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about bad people. In almost every case file I've read, the person behind the wheel wasn't a criminal mastermind. They were someone in a moment of financial freefall, someone grieving a job loss, someone who had had a genuinely good month for the first time in a long time and didn't want it to end. The car, in almost every version of this story, was never really about the car. It was about wanting just a little longer to be the kind of person who drives that car. That's a deeply human impulse. It's just one that a fleet management server doesn't know how to forgive, because the server was never built to understand why, only when. So let's take it apart, piece by piece, the way it actually happens. Not movie time, in real, bureaucratic, agonizingly slow real time, which is ironically what makes it so dangerous, because slowness feels like safety. It isn't. When your rental return time passes and you haven't brought the car back, almost nothing happens immediately. Rental companies build in a grace period, typically a few hours to a full day, because the overwhelming majority of late returns are just that, late. Traffic, a missed flight, a line at the counter. The system is designed around human error, not human intention. Think of it like a security guard watching a bank of monitors. A single door left ajar doesn't trigger the alarm. It triggers a note, a flag, something to check on later, not now. During this window, your car is technically still out, your credit card is still on file, and the company's internal software is simply waiting. This is the most psychologically dangerous part of the entire event, because it feels like proof that nothing is wrong. No calls, no emails, just silence. And silence to a certain kind of brain sounds a lot like permission. Consider a composite case pulled together from several real recovery files I reviewed. Details changed, but the pattern is identical every time. A renter picks up a leased Range Rover for what was supposed to be a 5-day business trip. Day 5 arrives, life intervenes, a family emergency, several states away. The renter drives to be with family instead of returning the vehicle, telling themselves they'll sort it out next week. Next week becomes next month. There's no single moment where a decision to keep the car forever is made. It's 100 small deferrals, each one feeling reasonable in isolation, that add up to something the renter never actually intended. This is important because almost nobody who ends up in serious trouble here started with the intention of grand theft. They started with a delay. The system, however, doesn't record intention. It records elapsed time and unanswered contact attempts, and those two variables, cold and indifferent, are the only inputs the machinery actually cares about. But somewhere in a server room you'll never see, a clock just started, and it doesn't stop for holidays, weekends, or good excuses. Once the grace period lapses, the process stops being human and becomes mechanical. Rental agencies run what's essentially a security guard as software system, automated flags that check whether the vehicle's GPS, and yes, virtually every modern rental fleet has GPS because insurance underwriters require it, is still moving, whether it's left a designated service radius and whether the card on file is still valid. This is also, quietly, when the first charge lands, not a penalty yet, an extension charge. The daily rental rate, sometimes at a punitive walk-up rate rather than your discounted booking rate, begins accumulating against your card automatically. For a luxury vehicle in a major market, that walk-up rate can exceed $1,000 a day. So the numbers you see accumulating on your statement during this window aren't a punishment being manually applied by an angry employee. They're a pre-written contractual formula, executing exactly as designed, completely indifferent to your circumstances. It looks aggressive because it is aggressive. It was built that way specifically to make staying past your due date financially irrational, faster than any human collections process ever could. There's also a quieter, less discussed layer here, the credit card or deposit hold on file. Most rental agreements authorize the company to charge the card on file for exactly the scenario, without requiring a new authorization each time, which means the financial consequences don't wait for a conversation. They begin the moment the automated system flags you as overdue, often before the human collection specialist has even picked up the phone. Here's where we need to slow down, because this is the part almost nobody understands correctly, and it's the single most important distinction in this entire episode. In most US states, a rental car that isn't returned doesn't automatically become a stolen in the eyes of the law the moment the due date passes. Civilly, it's first treated as conversion, the unauthorized use of someone else's property that you initially had lawful possession of. Think of it like borrowing a neighbor's ladder and simply keeping it in your garage indefinitely. It's a civil wrong. The rental company can sue you for the value of the car, for lost income, for repossession costs. But most states also have a specific statute that converts a failure to return a rental vehicle into a criminal matter once certain conditions are met, usually a defined number of days past the due date, commonly somewhere between 72 hours and 30 days depending on the state, combined with the company demonstrating a good faith attempt to contact you and recover the vehicle. Once both of those boxes are checked, many jurisdictions allow the company to file what's essentially a theft by conversion report with police, and that's when you're no longer a defendant in a civil suit. You're a suspect in a criminal investigation, and the burden of proof, the potential penalties, and the permanency of the record you're building all change dramatically. It's also worth noting how differently states treat the value of the vehicle in these statutes. In many jurisdictions, theft by conversion involving a vehicle above a certain dollar threshold, and virtually any modern luxury vehicle clears that threshold easily, is automatically charged as a felony rather than a misdemeanor. The car's price tag, ironically, is working against you the entire time it's sitting in your driveway. And once police are looped in, this stops being a conversation between you and a company. It becomes a warrant with your name on it. Let's talk about how these vehicles actually get found, because pop culture has completely warped this. The image most people carry around, sunglasses, a black tow truck, a dramatic late-night confrontation, belongs almost entirely to movies, not to the actual unglamorous logistics industry that handles vehicle recovery every single day, for reasons that have nothing to do with drama and everything to do with cost control. Nearly every luxury rental, and increasingly most standard rentals, ships with embedded telematics, GPS modules that report location at intervals, sometimes continuously, sometimes on a scheduled ping. This isn't a secret tracking device installed by a suspicious company. It's typically disclosed in the fine print of your rental agreement, and it exists primarily for fleet management and theft recovery insurance requirements, not surveillance of honest customers. Once a vehicle is flagged, a repossession agent, a licensed, bonded professional, not a bounty hunter with a shotgun, is dispatched with the vehicle's last known coordinates. Their entire methodology is built around avoiding confrontation, not creating it. Repo agents overwhelmingly recover vehicles from parking lots, driveways, and street parking, at times specifically chosen because the renter is not present. The Hollywood image of a chase down a highway is statistically almost fictional. It's expensive, dangerous, opens the company to liability, and is completely unnecessary when the vehicle can simply be located and towed while you're asleep or at work. The mechanical detail here that surprises almost everyone. Repossession agents are legally required, in the vast majority of states, to avoid what's called a breach of the peace during recovery. That means if you're standing next to the vehicle, physically objecting, or the recovery would require confrontation, the agent is obligated to disengage and pursue the vehicle through the courts instead, which is actually slower and more expensive for the company, not faster. This is why so many recoveries happen at 3 a.m. in an empty driveway rather than in a dramatic daylight standoff. The system is engineered to avoid conflict, not manufacture it. The drama you're picturing almost never serves anyone's interests, including the repo agent's own. Even once the vehicle itself is recovered, the story doesn't end. And this is the part almost nobody thinks about until it's already happening to them. The rental company will typically generate a final invoice covering every day the vehicle was held past the authorized period, at the elevated rate we discussed earlier, plus recovery costs, the repossession agent's fee, transport, storage while the vehicle awaited pickup, and then inspection charts to assess for damage or excess mileage accrued during the unauthorized period. If that final balance goes unpaid, it typically gets referred to a collections agency, and from there, it can appear on your credit report as a charged-off debt, sometimes explicitly coded in a way that future landlords, lenders, and even some employers doing background checks can see. Separately, and often more painfully, most major rental companies participate in shared industry databases that track renters with unresolved recovery incidents. A flag in that system means you're simply unable to rent a vehicle from any major company for years afterward, a consequence that has nothing to do with courts or credit scores, and everything to do with a permanent asterisk next to your name in an industry you may not even think about using again until you desperately need to. So even in the version of this story where you're never arrested, the paperwork alone can follow you for the better part of a decade. Let's clear up the things almost everyone gets wrong about this scenario, because these misconceptions are exactly what convince otherwise rational, careful people that this is a survivable, even reasonable plan. Every single one of them sounds intuitive on the surface. Every single one of them falls apart the moment you look at how the actual mechanics work underneath. Myth number 1. If I just keep making the extension payments, it's basically the same as a really long rental. It is not the same, legally or financially. Rental agreements almost universally cap the authorized rental duration, often 30 days, after which the contract itself lapses regardless of whether you're still paying the daily rate. Continuing to pay doesn't renew your legal right to possess the vehicle. It just delays the company noticing that the underlying agreement has already expired. Why it's false? You're not renting anymore. You're paying money into a contract that no longer legally exists, which courts have repeatedly treated as evidence of intent, meaning it can actually make your legal situation worse, not better, because it shows you knew you weren't supposed to have the car and paid to keep it anyway. Myth number 2. They'll never bother pursuing something this small compared to their fleet size. Reality, rental companies operate on razor-thin margins per vehicle and are contractually obligated to their insurers and lien holders, often banks that technically own the vehicle outright, to recover unreturned assets aggressively. Why it's false? A single luxury vehicle can represent $80,000 to $150,000 in owned or financed asset value. That is never too small to chase. Recovery isn't optional for the company. In many cases, their own financing agreements legally require them to report and pursue unreturned vehicles within a specific window, or the company itself faces penalties from its lender. Myth number 3. As long as I don't drive it across state lines, I'm not doing anything federal. This one is particularly dangerous because it contains a grain of truth wrapped around a much bigger lie. Why it's false? Crossing state lines with a vehicle you're not legally entitled to possess can trigger the federal Dyer Act, which involves the FBI, a genuinely different category of consequence. But not crossing state lines doesn't protect you from state-level theft by conversion charges, which carry their own serious penalties, including potential prison time depending on the vehicle's value. Staying local doesn't make this legal. It just changes which agency eventually knocks on your door. Myth number 4. Insurance will just cover it, so it's basically a victimless situation. Reality, this might be the most quietly damaging myth of all. Why it's false? Rental companies do carry insurance, but a claim for an unreturned vehicle raises that company's premiums, gets investigated by fraud units because insurers specifically scrutinize conversion claims for staged theft, and ultimately still requires the company to prove they pursued you for recovery, meaning insurance doesn't stop the legal pursuit, it runs parallel to it. There is no version of this where a claim gets filed and everyone simply moves on. Someone always ends up paying the difference between the claim and the actual loss. And increasingly, courts has held that someone accountable is you through restitution, even after an insurance payout. Myth number 5. If I just tell them I lost the keys or the car got stolen from me, that resets everything. Reality, this is by a wide margin the most legally dangerous move on this entire list, worse than saying nothing at all. Why it's false? Filing a false police report or telling a rental company a fabricated story about theft isn't a clever delay tactic. It's an independent crime layered directly on top of whatever civil or criminal exposure already exists from the late return itself. Investigators specifically look for inconsistencies in these reports, timelines that don't match GPS data the company already has access to, for instance, and the proven false report doesn't just fail to help you, it actively signals consciousness of guilt to a prosecutor, which can turn a borderline charging decision into a certain one. So if the payments don't protect you, the small scale doesn't protect you, the state line doesn't protect you, the insurance doesn't protect you, and the fabricated story actively makes things worse, what's actually left standing between you and the worst case outcome? Let's talk about what you can actually do. If you ever find yourself past a rental due date, whether by 5 hours or through some chain of bad decisions by 5 weeks, here is the actual concrete sequence that minimizes the damage. This isn't about avoiding consequences entirely, and it isn't a magic script that erases a genuine problem. It's about controlling which consequences you face and giving yourself the best possible version of a bad situation rather than the worst. Every item on this list is something ordinary people with no legal training and no special connections have used to turn a 5-alarm crisis back into a manageable paperwork problem. 1. Contact the company before they contact you. The single biggest factor separating a civil late fee from a criminal referral is who initiates contact. A renter who calls and says, "I'm going to be late, here's why," is treated as a customer service situation, logged in a completely different internal queue than a renter who goes silent and has to be tracked down. pick up the phone first. It costs you nothing but a slightly uncomfortable 5-minute conversation, and it is, without exaggeration, the single highest leverage action on this entire list. 2. Never disable or attempt to interfere with the vehicle's telematics. Beyond the fact that it's almost universally a direct breach of the rental agreement, tampering with a GPS unit, removing it, covering it, parking the vehicle somewhere specifically to block signal can itself be treated as evidence of intent to permanently deprive the owner of the vehicle. That specific legal phrase, intent to permanently deprive, is the exact language that upgrades a civil matter into a criminal one in most jurisdictions. Leave the hardware alone. It is doing you no harm sitting there silently reporting a location you have every right to be in. 3. Document every communication in writing. If you call, follow up with a short email summarizing what was discussed and agreed. If financial hardship is the reason for the delay, put the specifics in writing. Not to be dramatic, but because courts and companies alike weigh a documented, good faith paper trail heavily in your favor if this ever escalates. A time-stamped record of you trying to resolve something is worth far more than your memory of a phone call months later. 4. Understand your actual contract terms before panicking. Pull the agreement. Look specifically for the authorized rental period, the daily late return rate versus the standard rate, and any clause referencing abandonment, conversion, or failure to return. Knowing your specific numbers, the actual dollar figures, and actual day counts that apply to your contract turns a vague, spiraling fear into a manageable problem with a defined, calculable ceiling. 5. If financial hardship is the real issue, say so explicitly and ask for a payment plan. Rental companies would overwhelmingly rather negotiate an extended payment arrangement or a low-cost extension than absorb the far higher cost of repossession, storage, legal filing, and the vehicle sitting unused generating zero revenue. You are not the first person to hit a cash flow problem mid-rental, and you won't be the last. This is a well-worn path with well-worn, unglamorous solutions, and asking for one costs you nothing but a little pride. 6. If you've relocated the vehicle, disclose its exact location. This is the single fastest way to convert a recovery investigation back into a routine come pick this up situation. Hiding the location, even passively by simply not answering calls, is functionally indistinguishable legally from actively concealing stolen property, even if that was never your intention. Transparency here isn't just the ethical choice, it's the strategically smarter one. 7. Consult an attorney the moment a company mentions law enforcement or police report. Once those specific words are used, you are no longer negotiating with a business. You are managing a potential criminal case, and that requires actual legal representation, not a phone call to customer service or a friendly conversation with the recovery specialist you've been talking to. This is the moment to stop DIYing your own defense. 8. Never make a second driver or third party responsible for return without documenting it. A surprising number of these cases start with someone lending the rental to a friend or family member who then doesn't return it on time, sometimes for entirely innocent reasons of their own. As the named renter, you remain legally and financially responsible regardless of who was actually driving. So if someone else currently has the vehicle, get it back into your own hands before the deadline, or at minimum, document the handoff and the plan for its return explicitly, in writing. If the vehicle is repossessed, request a full itemized accounting before paying any balance. Recovery fees, storage fees, transport charges, and diminished value assessments vary wildly between companies and are sometimes inflated well beyond actual cost. You have the right in most jurisdictions to a detailed itemized statement before settling any balance. Don't simply pay whatever number appears on a final invoice without understanding what it's actually composed of. Treat the due date the way you'd treat a loan payment, as a hard deadline, not a soft suggestion. The single best piece of advice in this entire episode is also the most boring one. Extensions exist, they're simple to request, and they're almost always cheaper, faster, and legally cleaner than any alternative path. If you think you'll be even a few hours late, extend before the deadline arrives, not after it's already passed. The entire cascade of consequences we just spent 20 minutes dissecting has exactly one off-ramp, and it's a 5-minute phone call made at the right time. None of this requires bravery. It requires exactly one phone call, made a little earlier than feels necessary. Here's what I keep coming back to, after everything we just walked through. The system that catches an unreturned rental car isn't some menacing, punitive machine built to ruin your life. It's actually, if you step back and look at it honestly, a remarkably elegant piece of engineering. GPS telematics, automated billing triggers, license recovery agents, tiered legal thresholds that carefully separate honest mistakes from genuine theft, and human collection specialists whose entire job, ironically, is to help you avoid the worst outcomes rather than rush you toward them. It's a system built with more patience, more redundancy, and more off-ramps than almost any other consequence-driven structure I've studied for this show. That intrusive thought, what if I just kept it, isn't a sign that you're a bad person for having it. It's a sign that you're human, and that somewhere in the exhausted, overextended part of your brain, a rental car briefly looked like an escape hatch from something much bigger than a car. Financial pressure, overwhelm, grief. The fantasy of just, for once, not going back to your old life, your old responsibilities, your old version of yourself. I don't think that impulse deserves shame. I think it deserves to be looked at honestly, the way we're looking at it right now, named, understood, and then set down, rather than acted on. Because here's the quieter truth sitting underneath all of this. The car was never actually the problem, and it was never going to be the solution either. Whatever it is you were really trying to escape, the bills, the exhaustion, the sense that your real life wasn't enough, none of that dissolves inside a leased G-Wagon with a GPS chip reporting your location every few minutes. If anything, the fantasy just gets more expensive, more fragile, and more time-limited the longer you hold on to it. The car is a machine with a lien on it, built by a company whose entire business model depends on getting it back safely, gently, without ever needing to involve a courtroom. And underneath that machine is still you, with the exact same problems you had before you sat down in that driver's seat. I think there's something almost reassuring in that if you let it be. This isn't a system designed to punish desperation. It's a system designed to absorb it, to give a struggling renter 5, 6, sometimes a dozen distinct opportunities to simply say, I need more time, before anything becomes irreversible. Every stage we walk through today, the grace period, the automated flag, the collections call, the extension offer, the payment plan, exists specifically so that an honest, temporary hardship never has to calcify into a permanent criminal record. The off-ramps aren't hidden, they're not even hard to find. They're built directly into the architecture of the process, waiting for you to take them. You don't need to outsmart that system. You were never actually up against it in the first place. You were only ever up against your own silence. You just need to make one phone call before the deadline instead of after it. And suddenly, all of this mechanical, patient, inevitable process simply never activates at all. No repo agent driving to your address at 3 a.m., no collections letter, no quiet flag sitting in an industry database with your name on it for the next several years. Just a slightly awkward conversation and then an ordinary Tuesday. So the next time you're sitting in a return lane, engine idling, watching another car roll through ahead of you, and that quiet, unreasonable thought slides in, what if I just didn't turn in? Let that moment be exactly what it's supposed to be. Ordinary. Forgettable. The kind of small, unremarkable choice that never becomes an episode of this show, never becomes a case file, never becomes the thing you're quietly Googling at 2 a.m., wondering how much trouble you're actually in. Return the car, make the call, let your ordinary life stay ordinary. Because the version of you who does that, boring as it sounds, is the version who gets to actually enjoy the next rental, the next trip, the next stretch of open road, without a clock somewhere counting down against them. But that's just a theory. A catastrophe theory. Thanks for not ruining your life.